Hello everyone, we're going to finish the chapter that we started before from our book The BFG by Roald Dahl, and the chapter was called The Marvellous Ears, and we've just found out that the BFG catches dreams. Let's find out a bit more. The BFG settled himself comfortably in his chair and crossed his legs. Dreams, he said, is very mysterious things. They is floating around in the air like little wispy misty bubbles, and all the time they is searching for sleeping people. Can you see them? Sophie asked. Well, never at first. Then how do you catch them if you can't see them? Sophie asked. Ah, said the BFG, now we is getting to the dark and dusky secrets. I won't tell a soul. I is trusting you, the BFG said. He closed his eyes and sat quite still for a moment while Sophie waited. Her dream, he said, as it goes whiffling through the night air, is making a tiny little buzzing, hammering noise. But this little buzzy hum is so silvery soft, it is impossible for human beings to be hearing it. Can you hear it? Sophie asked. The BFG pointed up at his enormous truck wheel ears, which he now began to move in and out. He performed this exercise proudly, with a little proud smile on his face. Is you seeing these? He asked. How could I miss them? Sophie said. There's a picture of his huge, huge ears. They're almost as big as his face. They maybe is looking a bit preposterous to you, the BFG said, but you must believe me when I say they is very extra usual ears indeed. They is not to be coughed at. I'm quite sure they're not, Sophie said. Well, they is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing. You mean you can hear things I can't hear, Sophie said. You is as deaf as a dumpling compared with me, cried the BFG. You is hearing only thumping loud noises with those little earwigs of yours, but I am hearing all sorts of secret whisperings of the world. Such as what? Sophie asked. Well, in your country, he said, I is hearing the footsteps of a ladybird as she goes walking across a leaf. Honestly, Sophie said, beginning to be impressed. What's more, I is hearing those footsteps very loud, the BFG said. When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her feet going clumpety clump clump, like a giant's footsteps. Good gracious me, Sophie said. What else can you hear? I is hearing the little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil. You mean you can hear ants talking? Every single word, the BFG said, although I is not exactly understanding their language. Go on, Sophie said. Well, sometimes on a very clear night, the BFG said, and I is swiggling my ears in the right direction, and here he swivelled his great ears upwards so they were facing the ceiling. If I is swiggling them like this, and the night is very clear, I can sometimes be hearing faraway music coming from the stars in the sky. A queer little shiver passed through Sophie's body, and she sat very quiet, waiting for more. My ears is what told me you was watching me out of your window last night, the BFG said. But I didn't make a sound, Sophie said. I was hearing your heart beating across the road, the BFG said. It was as loud as a drum. Oh, go on, Sophie said, please. I can hear plants and trees. Do they talk? Sophie asked. Well, they is not exactly talking, the BFG said, but they is making noises. For instance, if I come along and I is picking a lovely flower and I is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, then the plant is screaming. I can hear it screaming and screaming very clear. You don't mean it, Sophie cried. How awful! It is screaming just like you would be screaming if someone was twisting your arm right off. Is that really true? Sophie asked. You is thinking I is Swiss figgling you? Well, it is rather hard to believe. Then I is stopping right here, the BFG said sharply. I is not wishing to be called a fibster. Oh, I'm not calling you anything, Sophie cried. The BFG gave her a long, hard stare. Sophie looked right back at him, her face open to his. I believe you. Oh, I believe you, she said softly. She had offended him. She could see that. I know you wouldn't, Sophie said. I wouldn't ever be fibbing to you. I know you wouldn't, but you must understand that it's not easy to believe such amazing things straight away. Well, I do understand that, the BFG said. So do please forgive me and go on, she said. He waited a while longer and then he said, oh, there we go. It is the same with trees as it is with flowers. If I is chopping an axe to the trunk of a big tree, I is hearing a terrible sound coming from inside the heart of the tree. Well, what sort of sound? Sophie asked. Well, it's a sort of moaning sound, the BFG said. It's like the sound an old man is making when he is dying slowly. He paused. The cave was very silent. Trees is living and growing just like you and me, he said. They is alive. So is plants. He was sitting very straight in his chair now, his hands clasped tightly together in front of him. His face was bright. His eyes were round and as bright as 2 stars. Such wonderful and terrible sounds I is hearing, he said. Some of them you would never wish to be hearing yourself. But some is like glorious music. He seemed to be almost transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions. Tell me some more about them, Sophie said. You just ought to be hearing the little moises talking, he said. Little moises is always talking to each other, and I is hearing them as loud as my own voice. What do they say? Sophie asked. Well, only moises know that, he said. Spiders is also talking a great deal. You might not be thinking it, but spiders is the most tremendous natterboxes. And when they is spinning their webs, they is singing all the time. They is singing sweeter than a nightingale. Who else do you hear? Sophie said. Well, one of the biggest chat bags is the caterpillars, the BFG said. What did they say? Oh, they is arguing all the time about who is going to be the prettiest butterfly. That is all they is ever talking about. Is there a dream floating around in here now? Sophie asked. The BFG moved his great ears this way and that, listening intently. And he shook his head. There is no dream in here, he said, except in the bottles. I has a special place to go for catching them. They is not often coming to Giant Country. How do you catch them? Well, the same way you is catching buttery flies, the BFG answered. With a net. He stood up and crossed over to a corner of the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was about 30 feet long. I'm trying to think how long that would be. That would be like 5 or 6 Mr. Pets lying on the floor, tall. Here is the dream catcher, he said, grasping the pole in one hand. Every morning I is going out and snitching new dreams to put in my bottles. Suddenly he seemed to lose interest in the conversation. I is getting hungry, he said. It is time for eats. And that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called Snozzcumbers. Okay, see you later. Bye.